After the great cataclysm of the Fall, the Eldar were on the brink of annihilation. Their peoples were scattered and fractured, isolated on Maiden Worlds, Craftworlds, or across 1,000 sub-realms within the Webway. Their debauchery and hedonism having left little in the way of martial pride, honour, strength, or skill. Then arose the Phoenix Lords, warriors of might so profound that they could rally together the remnants of the dying race. Peerless fighters in whose souls sang the battle hymns of Khaine himself and were death incarnate to the foes of the Eldar. Asurmen, Jain Zar, Baharoth, names and figures of legend. And Arha. Where Malgan-Ra espoused destruction from afar, Arha closed in on the foe with an unrelenting fury. Where Baharoth swept down from above, Arha would strike from the front. Where the other Phoenix Lords cautioned temperance and compromise, Arha would neither relent nor conciliate. He alone stood against his brethren. He alone fought against the forces of darkness until they consumed him at last. He alone resisted Asurmen, Hand of Asurian. His legacy, his ideals, his purity of spirit, martial might and willpower have echoed long through the ages after his death. And through his teachings, the warriors of the Drukhari thrive and prosper. Arha is a name that all should know, that all should fear. For while the naive try to forgive and forget, Arha remembers. Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Azazel. Today's entry is on Arha, and if you think that I'm pronouncing it oddly, then honestly, fair enough. I don't listen to audiobooks, so I've heard Arha, Arhra, Arhra, so I'm sort of sticking with my version for now. Standard points to be aware of. 1. I don't use any AI on the channel, all mistakes are my own. 2. This is Warhammer, so there will be conflicting materials scattered around. Feel free to point out ones that I've missed. And 3. Like, comment and subscribe to help the channel out. And if you haven't watched my entry on The Fall of the Eldar, then maybe check it out before this video if you're a newcomer to the hobby. And a final side note, this is my first recording as a married man. But you're not here to listen to that, you're here to listen to the grim darkness. I just wanted to show off. Now, seal your hearts and gird your minds as we enter the most horrific place imaginable. The place where hope goes to die and where thirsting gods rack the souls of billions, while directing madness on the stage of our galaxy as easily as puppeteers pull on strings. Welcome to the 31st millennium. The darkest epoch of the Eldar race is that of the Fall. The hubris, vanity, and indulgences of an entire species consuming it from within like a dark canker. As indulgences turned to necessities and demanded their fulfillment at all costs, so too did some among the Eldar turn outwards. Their tales belong in another entry, yet in brief words, they were those of the Exodites, those who forswore the hedonism of the Eldar Empire, those who spoke out against these indolences and indulgences. They came as doomsayers, clairvoyants of the pessimistic, psycho-projecting the fear of the future into the minds of the common Eldari, claiming the end was coming and their doom was approaching, and that only an exodus could spare them. Beyond the cult-like fatalism of the Exodites were the Craftworlders, those who, for one reason or another, didn't leave with the Exodites, yet foresaw the catastrophe that was rapidly approaching. Many failed to escape the birth of Slaanesh, yet still some cleared the tear in reality to forever sail the stars upon their craft worlds. And finally, the dread kin of the Eldar, the Drukhari, those who, in many ways, are the true inheritors of the Eldar Empire, and who still espouse the virtues of cruelty, cunning, and pain within Comora in the Webway. A fractured, fallen race, now forever at the mercy of She Who Thirsts, their child god who had swallowed up the firmament of Eldari gods and latched their tempestuous claws upon the souls of each and every one of the Eldar. It was Asurmen who came first. The greatest of all the Phoenix Lords was once a callous and carefree Eldar named Iliathin upon the planet of Idaferon. Through luck, chance, and perhaps the unforeseen twists of fate, he survived the fall. Against all odds, he came into his own only at the downfall of his entire race, and to the Craftworlders he brought knowledge. The use of spirit stones to safeguard against the pull and consumption by Slaanesh, their ways of war and warrior virtue that would guard and protect the Eldar as they drifted their way among the stars for millennia. And he was not alone. For although Asurmen was the first, he was by no means the only. Others arose after him, heroes, guardians, and champions of the fractured Eldar race, each of them encompassing an aspect of terrible war, like a brand new firmament of gods amongst the Eldar. They fought on behalf of their people, perfected their craft, and in doing so taught others their ways of war. Baharoth favoured subtlety and grace, and in his ways of war perfected aerial combat. Maugan Ra, in his darkness and artifice, forged weapons of death that culled the Eldar's enemies from a distance. Arha understood that fury was more than an emotion, that in its purest form it was a gift and a weapon, one to be wielded with a furious discipline that could outshine his brethren. Arha taught his disciples how to harness the power of their rage and strike out with it, and in their fury none could stand against them. Arha, father of scorpions, was as beautiful and terrible as the aspect of war that he encompassed. Then he was betrayed. For his fellow Phoenix Lords cautioned against his ways of war, his fury in battle. They foresaw the terrible road that would lead Arha and his followers to doom as they embraced violence and learned to lust for it. The other Phoenix Lords taught their followers to adopt a war mask, in order to insulate their souls from the dark joys of battle and the bloodlust it brought, lest the scattered remnants of the race develop a taste for wickedness and invite chaos into their souls, and thus ultimately doom the survivors of the fall. Arha refused. He saw their caution as the beginnings of the slippery slope to destruction. By being unable to embrace war in its truest aspect, to fight with one's entire conviction, the Eldar race would not survive. His children, his students, his chosen would not survive. And here, my dearest friends, is where our stories diverge. For among the Craftworlders, the Asuriani, those who cling to the doctrine and teachings of Asurmen and his fellow Phoenix Lords, Arha betrayed them. In his dedication to war and embrace of battle, his soul became corrupted beyond all reason. It was Arha who let in waves of demons into the first shrine. Those Phoenix Lords, their allies, students, all who were within the shrine were consumed by the violence that ensued, or scattered across the stars as they fled. Arha, now the fallen Phoenix Lord who burned with the dark light of chaos, fled to Comora and founded the first of the shrines of the Incubi, his dark visage and teachings revered by the Incubi of the Dark City as they trained to emulate the legend of Arha. Arha's student, a child he had taken in named Karandras, ascended to become the Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions in his teacher's stead. In doing so, he tempered the warlike savagery that Arha had perfected and leashed it with a discipline and patience. The Striking Scorpions would forever have a murderous fury in battle, but it would be contained. A subtle, yet vital, difference between two near-identical teachings. This distinction, which Arha would have viewed as a weakness within his former student, was revealed as a virtue when he faced Karandras on the abandoned craftworld of Zandros. There, the former student faced former master amidst the abandoned Wraithbone halls. Arha and his allies fought with all the dark and blinkered fury that he had prided himself upon, an unstoppable force of death. Yet Karandras was the greatest of his pupils and had spent the ages perfecting his style of Arhas. For 17 days, the duel raged. Back and forth amidst the ruins of Zandros, Arha ever a moment away from murdering his former student, ever a hair's breadth away from a killing blow. Karandras using every iota of skill, technique and focus to not succumb to his former master's might. And yet while Karandras could survive, he was unable to strike a killing blow in return. Arha's blind fury and his allies ensured that Karandras was ever on the back foot. And so Karandras leaned into his own teachings, his own ways of war rather than his former masters. For patience and discipline were things Arha had little use for. During a vital moment of the duel, Karandras concealed himself within a pool of blackness, and there simply waited. Arha, driven into a berserk rage over 17 days of a duel, only to find himself cheated of victory, flew into a blind fury. Arha killed all of his allies in his anger, and left the Craftworld never to be seen again. Or, at least, this tale is what the Asuryani would have you believe. Those of the Drukhari, specifically the Incubi, whisper of a different tale. Any and all who come as supplicants to the shrines may hear the truth of Arha. For he did disagree with his friends and brothers, and indeed it was partially due to Arha's methods of war. Yet it was also due to the selfishness of the other Phoenix Lords, for they wished to abandon the Eldar of Comra and fight only for the Craftworlds, to abandon an enormous portion of what was now a remnant race. Arha knew better. He understood that the fight against chaos would be required from the devotion of the entire race, not merely the few chosen. In disgust at the selfishness of his brethren, Arha left his fellow Phoenix Lords and begat new shrines, ones that catered to any and all. Craftworlders, Comorites, Exodites, all may seek supplication at his shrines. All were welcome to try their hand and prove their worth. The only distinction would be those that survived and those who did not. He tested his new followers and slew those too weak or too corrupt to learn from him. He taught discipline and martial skill only to those possessed of sufficient fury to stand against him. Whenever chaos appeared, Arha was there to fight against the depredations of demonkind, a fallen Phoenix Lord of Fury. His ire was terrible to behold as he fought each and every battle that sought him out. In his final battle, he faced more foes than any could imagine, numberless hordes that threatened to overwhelm him. There, he called out for his brethren to join him, that his lost Phoenix Lord brothers and sisters may stand with him and fight against their mutual enemy. Hours turned to days. Nights passed beyond number, and Arha fought without respite, hoping his former friends would answer the call. They never did. Arha, the fallen Phoenix Lord, was pierced through the heart by the dark light of chaos, while he was alone and abandoned by those he had once called friend. With corruption burning through his body, he returned to his shrine, to his followers. Yet while it wore his body, what blazed from his face was an unholy fire that drove his acolytes into terror and madness. Yet when all seemed lost, the students heard their master's voice from amid the flames. It bid them to marshal their fury and stand against him. That now was the ultimate test of their discipline. Such was their devotion that they obeyed despite their terror. They slew Arha's corrupted mortal form and partook of his untouched spirit, taking it into themselves so that the way of Arha should endure forevermore. Let us take the briefest of moments before we discuss where Arha is, or indeed who he is today. As with everything both in mythology and in 40k, and very much so within 40k mythology, things are a tad mixed up. The unreliable narrator does an incredible amount of heavy lifting when it comes to clearing up certain features of the setting. Sometimes that can be two similar stories that diverge, but it's only because one side didn't know about some other thing going on that makes a difference. In other times, it can be timelines. After all, Warhammer 40k gets a bit wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey when it comes to such things as warp travel, and bleeding effects of the warp. Combine that with the fact that the Eldar are a bit of a middle child in 40k. Sure, they are essential to the setting, but it doesn't mean they are favourites, and sometimes they can even be a little bit forgotten about. Unless they are appearing to get clobbered by a named Space Marine, of course. With that in mind, there is more than a smidgen of a difference between these two tales. For such mythological tales to be lost to time, it takes a significant number of centuries. Yet, Phoenix Lords are still kicking about, more or less, and the duel between Karandras and Arha didn't occur until 928 M41. I don't have answers, merely conjecture, but I wouldn't be surprised that, if they ever cover it in more detail, we would see a little clearing up of the mythology, and perhaps a bit of a pushback on the date of the duel on Zandros. After all, it seems a little too recent in my opinion. Ideally, a novel or two with some flashbacks that iron out some of the details and retcon some of the wilder differences between the two recollections of events, but I don't want to bore you too much with my conjecture. We'll get there when we get there. But more importantly is the question, where is Arha in modern Warhammer 40k? As always, the character is wherever they will make the most money for Games Workshop. However, going by the lore, he's likely not dead, or at least not in a permanent way. As an, albeit former, Phoenix Lord, he and his ilk don't dissipate to be consumed by she who thirsts. Their essences remain within the armour. This allows Phoenix Lords to disappear for centuries, only to reappear when an exarch of their particular path dons the armour of the fallen Phoenix Lord, and is absorbed into the greater whole, becoming the Phoenix Lord once more. So, while he is a fallen one, there's no disputing that he can more than likely do exactly the same. That is, unless the chaos corruption that he suffered entirely did away with such abilities, but until such time as GW confirm or deny the details of that story, we will assume not. And so, because of this reason, it's likely that the Incubus tale of Arhra is artistic license. The section where they partook of his untouched spirit, taking it into themselves so that the way of Arha should endure forevermore, likely refers to Arha dying in some way, shape or form, presumably by the hands of his own students witnessing his physical corruption, and an acolyte of Arha donning his armor and becoming one with the fallen Phoenix Lord once more. It matches the mythological telling of the tale, and it still follows the existing logic that we know of. There's also another similar option which I'll briefly mention at the end of this video, so stick around for that. But there is one character in 40k beyond all others that fits the description of Arha. One whose identity is so closely intertwined with that of Arha's legacy that it is all but confirmed. Drazhar. The Great Shrine of the Incubi is a realm of danger unto itself. Even the lowliest of the Incubi is a monstrously skilled warrior. Fierce bodyguards, prized highly among the elite cabals of Commorragh. To enter their sacred shrines against their will would be nigh unthinkable. Yet that is exactly what one being did. Drazhar. None knew of him, not his name nor whence he came, a stranger garbed in dark and ancient segmented armor. He walked through the gates, trespassed across the Incubi's most guarded areas, and headed straight for the sanctum. He did so while eviscerating all who stood in his way. They were not threats to his skill, merely obstacles, and a warm-up, for at the end of his journey, the hierarch of the shrine faced him in combat. It took a mere couple of minutes before the hierarch was dead, yet Drazhar would not seize the reins of power for himself. Drazhar instead donned the role of executioner of the Incubi, a master of blades, a champion of his order whose comings and goings are death to those he faces. Even his name is a mask. Drazhar is merely a title, a description of the incarnation of death he has become. Its meaning, the living sword, an epithet he has earned 1,000 times over since donning the title. Rumors whisper that his abilities allowed him to single-handedly kill 3 custodians simultaneously. Yet more than this, one story speaks above all else as to Drazhar being Arha reborn. For during the events surrounding the Aeldari, Drazhar found himself facing potentially old nemesis and former friend Jain Zar, the Storm of Silence, the Phoenix Lord of the Howling Banshees herself. The battles that followed saw Drazhar attempt to murder the priestess of the Whispering God, Ivrain. Only through the diligent, lightning-quick reactions from Jain Zar were the Aeldari spared from losing their chosen one. The duels between Jain Zar and Drazhar raged through forgotten subrealms of Commorragh until finally, in the forbidden realm of Shah Dom, Drazhar killed the Phoenix Lord. What other Incubus could ever lay claim to such an endeavor? To slay a Phoenix Lord of legend? Yet despite banishing the armor of Jain Zar to Eilundrach in an effort to prevent a return of the Phoenix Lord, Eniad's power kept through to the waking world and found a way to give Jain Zar new life. It was on the forgotten Craftworld of Zandros that Drazhar caught up with Jain Zar once again. There, the two of them swept together in a clash of violence that shook the wraithbone beneath their feet. Back and forth, leader and killer, protector and destroyer. The two of them launched into a new duel that seemed little more than a continuation of their one before. Yet something was different. Jain Zar had changed. What had returned from the grave this time was not merely a Phoenix Lord of an aspect of Khaine, but a disciple with the power of Inead behind them. The death and destruction that had reigned across the Craftworld of Zandros fueled the limbs of Jain Zar, making her stronger, faster, and too much for Drazhar. She disarmed him with one strike and then beheaded him. So fell Drazhar, executioner of the Incubi. Yet it is no surprise that Jain Zar and Drazhar fought on Zandros, the very same Craftworld where Arha and Karandras had faced one another all those years before. An echo of the same fight. But more than this is that when all was quiet, and the dust from the last of the dying had settled in the silence of the forgotten Craftworld, a lone Incubus came across the armor of Drazhar. Ever opportunistic, as all Drukhari are, she reached for the armor, to don the dark and ancient panoply of war, and was subsumed by its animus. And now once more, Drazhar walks the galaxy. Well, possibly. In the interests of being strictly honest, the passage that speaks of the Incubus being overcome by the armor, and therefore hinting that Drazhar is a former Phoenix Lord, is supposedly in a tiny section of the Blood of the Phoenix rulebook. I do not have this rulebook. I asked all my Eldar collecting friends, and they do not have it. I searched online for picture evidence or on the Warhammer Vault, and I can't find any physical proof. So I'm filing it under the Trust Me Bro bracket until further notice. If any of you at home have this little tidbit of lore and you can send me a picture on social media, I would hugely appreciate it. However, this does line up with Games Workshop's method of working. The fact that, in-universe, he is rumoured to be Arha, the duel back on Zandros, the broken striking scorpion crest on Drazhar's actual model. However, there are a few issues alongside this, that primarily being, why didn't Jain Zar recognize Drazhar? Neither armor nor fighting style was noted, and that could be construed as a little odd. A fallen brother and friend returned, and she didn't mention anything at all? But then again, it had been many years. Arha had been through chaotic corruption, supposedly, and we can assume that his armor had been altered and personalized in the years since. Or even perhaps believing that he was dead, the thought didn't register in her own mind? Or perhaps, given that Drazhar never speaks, she merely thought it not worth her time. Either way, Eldar are a little left by the wayside when it comes to the lore. But a side note, thank you to Mike Brooks for that Voidscarred novel, it was an absolute cracker. I believe I've covered the rise and fall of Arha about as cohesively and comprehensively as I can for the moment, at least until a Retcon or two decides to come along in the near future. But what do you guys think, most importantly? Would you prefer that Drazhar not be Arha? Would you prefer it to be separate warriors, or even a Sith-style warrior-apprentice thing? And the tidbit I mentioned earlier, I read a fan theory that said, when Arha's students partook of his untouched spirit, taking it into themselves so that the way of Arha should endure forevermore, it meant that Arha's armor and the fragments of his personality and skill were dispersed throughout them all. That Drazhar is merely an incubus who has gathered the largest number of armor pieces and serves in his role as executioner to try and find and claim the final pieces of Arha's armor, wherein Arha will truly be reborn. That, however, is a fun discussion I'm happy to have with any one of you anytime. I'm happy to throw fan theories around with wild abandon. I even have one surrounding Perturabo, Vashdor, and the Spirit of Ferrus Manus, which I love the idea of, but it's wishful thinking at best, and definitely for another entry. With that said and done, I will bid you adieu. Do please like, comment, and subscribe. A little act of support from you guys goes a huge way for a small creator like myself, and I do hope you enjoyed some escapism from reality today. For that's why we are all here, isn't it? Until next time.